Masechet Shekalim, Daf Yud Bet 12. We're going to be dealing with the Mishnah of 3 cases where someone donates all of his property, but included within that are things that actually can be offered on the Mizbeach. First case will be he donates all of his property and includes ketoret in there that he owns. Second, when he has animals within his property that can be sacrificed. And the third is when he donates and there's wine, oil, and birds. Now, the complication here is he doesn't specify to what purpose he wants to donate them. Let's say he has some animals and he donates them as a sacrifice to be burnt on the Mizbeach, and that's clear. It goes and becomes a sacrifice. However, in this case, he didn't specify, and maybe he only meant that it should go to Bedek HaBayit. That's the general fund for the upkeep of the Bet HaMikdash, not for sacrifices. In such a case, if he donates it as such, well, then that animal would be sold. It can't just be sold on the market because it does have some Kiddusha value. But it'll be sold and then it'll be bought by someone who does need a sacrificial animal, and that person would bring it as a sacrificial animal. So not directly, but indirectly. In these cases, since the person does not specify which one he wants, so there's going to be a machloket, especially in the second case of donating animals, of what we think his reasoning is. We try to read his mind of what he meant, and then we treat the animal or whatever he donated accordingly. Okay, so let's look at the first case. Makdish nechasav says, I donate everything, all my possessions, to the Bet HaMikdash. And among them, there were some things that were fit to be a communal offering. The Mishnah does not specify exactly what it's talking about here, what kinds of things. However, the Talmud will explain that it's talking about someone who has some ketoret spices in his home. So what do we do with that ketoret? Answer is 2 opinions. Rabbi Akiva says you can pay artisans with that ketoret. Not that the artisans would have any use for it, but then they could sell it back. According to Rabbi Akiva, even though this ketoret is itself holy, you can transfer the holiness to the work of the artisans, even though it's just like a service, not an actual material. So Rabbi Akiva says you can just give it to them directly, and then you can buy it back. Amar lo Rabbi Alamalo ben Azai, and Ben Azai says these are not equivalent items. You can't take something, an item that's kadosh, and move it onto labor. Labor doesn't become, can't accept Kiddusha. Rather, you have to transfer it to another item, to money. So we take this, these spices, the ketoret, we say, okay, this will be for to pay the artisans. And then we take money that's not sacred, transfer it to the money, and then we give the spices to the artisan. And then we can buy back the spices from the artisans. And when we do that, we have another benefit because we can use the new monies from the next year so that any of those spices can be used for the next year. Okay, so that's machlok between Rabbi Akiva and Ben Azai, as the Gemara will explain. Can you transfer a kiddusha to labor or not? Rabbi Akiva says yes. Ben Azai says no. And then we get to the second case. Hamakdish nechasav v'hiya bahen behema reuya al gabei mizbeach zecharim unekevot. Person donates all of his possessions. Among his possessions are animals. Some of them are male. Some of them are female. What do we do with them? Here's a major machloket that will occupy a lot of the daf today. Rabbi Eliezer omer, zecharim yemacheru l'surchei olot, unkevot yemacheru l'surchei zibchei shelamim. Rabbi Eliezer, in other words, assumes that since he didn't specify, he must be talking about that he donated the animals for Bedek HaBayit, for the general fund. So you cannot simply join them with other sacrifices, with communal sacrifices and burn them, or individual sacrifices. No, you got to sell them. But since they are animals that are worthy of being on the Mizbeach, the person you sell them to can't just go and take it home and do whatever he wants with it. You sell it to someone who intends to use it as an olah. If it's male, then that will be an olah. Olah has to be male. If it's female, then it'll be for shelamim. Shelamim has to be female. Okay, or rather, female has to be a shelamim. Good. And then that way, the money would and the money that a Bet HaMikdash receives from that sale will join up with the rest of the money for all the other possessions in his house that he also sold. And those animals, whoever bought them, will bring them as a mizbeach. Okay, so the Rabbi Eliezer therefore assumes his intention, since he joined it together with his house, is simply for Bet HaKabayit. Here's the contrast. Rabbi Yoshua Omer, Zecharim atzman yikrebu olot. The male animals, since they can become olah, we assume that he meant, I want all my possessions to be donated. Well, if it's an animal that is worthy of donating, then yes, that's going to be a sacrificial animal. Joshua says that we assume that's what he meant, even though he didn't specify it. Now, the nekevot, the females, you can't just make them shelamim, because the problem with shelamim is that the kohanim and the owners eat part of it. And if they're eating part of it, they're not really donating everything. This person donated everything that he had to the Bet HaMikdash. So shelamim does not fit into the category of a complete donation. It has to be an olah. But the nekeva cannot be an olah. Therefore, we sell the nekevot to people who need shalamim, and with that money, we don't put that money into Bet HaKabayit like Rabbi Eliezer says, but rather we buy males and sacrifice them as olot. So there you go. Rabbi Yoshua assumes that the person had in mind animals will actually be sacrificed, and even though nekevot cannot be totally sacrificed like an olah, it still gets sanctification as the korban, but it's switched out for a male, and that is used as an olah. Okay, that's Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua. They both agree that all the other, his table, his chairs, everything else he donated, goes to Bet HaKabayit. Would be sold. They don't need the tables and chairs. They will be sold, and then they would take the money and use it for the general upkeep. Amar Rabbi Akiva. Now, regarding this, we had two opinions, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua, but now we're going to have two more opinions about those opinions. He says, I agree with Rabbi Eliezer that it just goes to Bet HaKabayit and there's no special kedusha. This kind of makes sense because Rabbi Akiva was the one that was also more mekel, we call it mekel above, regarding the person who donates ketoret. He says, no problem, we just give it to the artisans. So he thinks that is correct. And the reason why is Rabbi Eliezer Shvat Midotav, Rabbi Yoshua Halak, because Rabbi Yoshua treats the males and the females the same. And it's the same as everything else. So everything for Bet HaKabayit. That makes sense. Don't make distinctions if they're all donated as one. Whereas Rabbi Yoshua does make a distinction. He says, the animals are one thing and the rest of possessions are something else. And then you have to treat the males and females differently. So that makes less sense. If a person donates all my possessions, he probably has one thing in mind that will apply to all of them. Unlike Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Papios, Rabbi Papias, he agrees with the Rabbi Yoshua. Shamati tibrei shenehem. Amakdish beferush kedibrei Rabbi Eliezer. Amakdish tam kedibrei Rabbi Yehoshua. Or rather, he splits the difference. He says, if someone says, I donate everything in my house and my animals. So then, since he says, and my animals, together with my possessions, that means he wants his animals to be treated like all the rest of his possessions. And in that case, he agrees with Rabbi Eliezer that it's meant for Bet HaKabayit. But if he just says, I donate all my possessions, and doesn't specify animals, then we can assume that the animals, if you asked him, he would have said, of course, those should be agreed to the Mizbeach. And then that would be the opinion of Rabbi Yehoshua. Okay, that's the end of the second case. And now we get to the third case. He donates all of his possessions, and there are other items, not animals, that can be offered on the Mizbeach, like yenot, ushmanim, ve'afot, wine, oil that you'd mix with meal offerings, and birds. Rabbi Eliezer omer yimachru l'sorchei oto hamin ve'yavi bidmehen olot u'shar nechasim yepelu lebet HaKabayit. So Rabbi Eliezer says you have to treat them actually like they are korbanot, even though Rabbi Eliezer above said regarding animals said you treat them like Bet HaKabayit. Over here it doesn't say that. It says you have to sell them to someone who needs that, someone who needs wine for his nesachim, someone who needs a bird for his korban. So you sell it to them and they will actually sacrifice it. And with the money, you bring olot. So you see that he thinks that these things have sanctification as korbanot. The Gemara will discuss why Rabbi Eliezer thinks that animals, we assume he does not, right, or just for Bedek Habayit, but these three items are actually designated as korbanot. And anyway, the rest of his possessions that are not fitting to be on an altar, those will go to Bedek Habayit. Okay, that is the Mishnah. That is the Mishnah. Okay, the Gemara will discuss each of these cases in turn. We start with the first one. Makdish Rabbi Yochanan Amar Ketoret. Rabbi Yochanan says, what is this first case talking about? It just says that there are among these items things that can be used for communal offerings, but don't specify. The next case is going to be animals, and the case after is going to be talking about other things. So like what's left? This is still talking about Ketoret. Okay. Amar Rabbi Yoshaya Tipatir B'Uman Mishabet Abtinas Sheyan Otel B'Scharo Ketoret. What is a person doing with Ketoret in his house? There's a prohibition. You're not allowed to burn Ketoret on your own. You can't even make Ketoret, right? Unless you're making it for the Bet HaMikdash. So therefore, Rabbi Shaya says, who would have Ketoret in their home? It must be the family of Bet Abtinas, because they were the experts and they prepared Ketoret, so they would have it. If someone in that family said, I donate all my possessions, among them is Ketoret, then it would follow the procedure in the Mishnah. That procedure was machloket between Rabbi Akiva and Ben Azai. Matama de Ben Azai. What is the reason for Ben Azai? That he says you have to transfer it to money. You give it to him, but then you transfer it to money. Because Ben Azai thinks that Kedusha cannot become desacralized to labor, or rather to money. Unlike Rabbi Akiva, who thinks that you can apply it directly to the labor, and therefore just give the Ketoret in its Kiddush Kadosh state to the artisan, and during that transfer, the Kiddusha will go to the labor. Ben Azai says, no, you got to transfer it to money first. Taman Tanenan. Okay, this is very important Mishnah in Timurah that gives us the foundations of what's the difference between Bedek Habayit and donating something as a sacrifice. So donating something as a sacrifice has a lot of chumrot, but actually donating something to Bedek Habayit also has its own chumrot, and now we're going to list a few of them. Yesh bekodshe Bedek Habayit shestam ekdeshot Bedek Habayit. Number one, if you just say unspecified, I consecrate something without specifying, then we assume it goes to Bedek Habayit. Okay, we'll see whose opinion this is compared to our Mishnah. Number two, hekdesh Bedek Habayit chal al hakol. You can donate anything to Bedek Habayit, right? Even if it's something that for sure they're not going to need. I could donate my own worth to Bedek Habayit. So it applies to everything, whereas for sacrifices, it only applies to things that can actually be sacrificed. Three, if it grows something, let's say I donate a chicken to Bedek Habayit, and while I have it, it lays an egg. That egg also goes to Bedek Habayit, unlike sacrificial animals. And also the Kohanim can get no personal benefit from that, unlike animals, where they benefit from sometimes the meat. In almost all cases, they'll benefit from the skin. Okay, so but in Bedek Habayit they do not benefit at all. Okay, so since we mentioned the first thing that the unspecified we assume is Bedek Habayit, Amar Rabbi Chananya de Rabbi Eliezer that Mishnah must follow the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, because he said in our Mishnah, the Tanenan, we're just repeating our Mishnah, Amakdish nechasav hayta behen behema reuya al gabe mizbeach zecharim utkevot. Eliezer omer zecharim machlul surchei olot. In the case when someone donates all of his possessions, and among them are male and female animals that can be sacrificed, Rabbi Eliezer assumes that they are only Bedek Habayit, and therefore they are sold to people who need it, and that money goes to Bedek Habayit. So that's how you see that he agrees with the Mishnah that without specifying, everything will be for Bedek Habayit. Okay, still on Rabbi Eliezer, what's his source? Amar Rabbi Yochanan Tamad Rabbi Eliezer v'ishki yakdish et beto kodesh laHashem. Someone donates his house, that will be holy to Hashem. That's pasuk. That's Vayikra 27:14. The next pasuk 27:15 also mentions someone donating a house, and he redeems it. He redeems it for money. So since we have two pasukim talking about houses, Why do we need both of them? So if this pasuk is talking about your own home, your home but where you live, the next pasuk already talks about that. Right? If he donates his house and he redeems it. Rather, this first pasuk is not talking about the house itself, but rather all the stuff in the house, everything, all the unspecified possessions, those will be like the house, and they will all go to bedek habayit. And so he learns it from the doubling of the mention of house in these pesukim. But Amar Rabbi Ze'ira. Now we're going to have three interpretations of the machloket between the Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua. In other words, in what case are they actually talking about? Rabbi Ze'ira, that's the same as Rabbi Zera in the Babli. Rav Huna b'shem Rav, in the name of Rav, the Babylonian. Bameh peligin b'makdish nechasav. Aval b'makdish adro kol ama modeh shehu lamizbeach. What they're only talking about in the case where someone donates all of his possessions. In that case, right, that's the machloket. But if someone says, I donate my animals, he only donates his animals. Well, then it's clear, even the Rabbi Eliezer would agree that he means it to go to the Mizbeach. Why would you donate just your animals? So then for sure, everything goes to the Mizbeach. That makes sense. Rabbi Ba, Rav Huna, second interpretation, Rabbi Ba, Rav Huna b'shem Rav. So this also in the name of Rav Huna, in the name of Rav, just like the first one. But the first one was Rabbi Ze'ara, and this one is Rabbi Ba. So apparently these two students understood the teaching of their master differently and opposite ways. So this version has Ma peligin b'makdish adro. The machloket is only when someone donates his animals specifically. In that case, even Rabbi Eliezer even would say, no, it doesn't matter. You didn't say that's for a sacrifice, so it's not for a sacrifice. Someone says, I donate all my possessions. Even Rabbi Yoshua would agree that it goes to Bedek Habayit because he says all my possessions, and he didn't specify animals, so they're going to go all together. Okay, so that's interesting. Now we analyze these two opinions. According to the Rabbi Zera, the first opinion makes sense, right? We understand that if someone says, I donate my animals, it makes sense that everyone would agree that they should go to the Mizbeach. But the question is to the Biba, the second interpretation, where the machloket is machloket, and when someone says, I donate my animals, and even there, Rabbi Eliezer would say, it doesn't go to the altar, but does it make sense? If we donate an animal, you think I have in mind that it's not going to be a sacrifice? I'm only donating the value of the animal? Doesn't make sense. Nobody would think that. Rabbi Eliezer wouldn't think that. So he can defend himself. They say yes. You're right. An animal should go to the mizbeach, and that's precisely why we'd expect him to say, "I donate my animals for kurban." So the fact that the person didn't say, "I want this animal to be for a sacrifice," why was he quiet? Why didn't he specify? So it's as if he's saying outright, "No, I want it to be only for bedek habayit," because otherwise, why would you hold back that information? Okay, so he can defend himself, that interpretation. And now the third interpretation, Rabbi Yochanan Amar, La Shanyahi hamakdish nechasav, he hamakdish edro, he hamachloket. Rabbi Yochanan says no difference. Doesn't matter whether you say all my possessions are donated or my animals specifically are donated. In both cases, their disagreement applies, right? Because either way, he was not explicit. So in both cases, Rabbi Eliezer would assume that just means bedek habayit, like that Mishnah that says, and Rabbi Yoshua says, no, we assume that he wants like the maximum kiddusha out of it. So either way, it will be a sacrificial animal. Okay, for an olah. Rav Huna b'shem Rav, Rabbi Abu b'shem Rabbi Yochanan. Kodshe bedek habayit shepodan timimim yatsu leholin. Okay, now we're going to talk about this. A separate case altogether. Can animal donated for bedek habayit be desacralized, right? Can donate bedek habayit and then you sell it. So like what happens to it? We're going to see two opinions. Rabbi Yochanan's opinion is that something that was donated for bedek habayit, an animal, and then you redeemed it, even though it's unblemished and can be sacrificed because unblemished, nevertheless, it goes, once you redeem it, it gets a non-sacred status, and the buyer can then use it for whatever he wants. It's unblemished, so the likelihood, we hope that he will use it to make a new offering. But it has to go that way, because if you have something that's bedek habayit, an animal's bedek habayit, you can't sacrifice it on the mizbeach, because only for bedek habayit. It has to be desacralized and then re-sacralized as a korban. So that's how it works. And matnita amraken, Mishnah in Cholin says so. Veladan vechalaban mutar lachar pidyonan. Mishnah says that after you redeem such an animal, then you can benefit from its offspring and its milk. You see, so if it was still had some kedusha bedek habayit, you wouldn't be able to use to take its children and its milk, as we said in that list beforehand. So that he has a proof. Now here's the opposite opinion. Rav Chizkiah b'shem Rav Chisda tipater shebeda'an temimim vehumemu. No, I'm going to explain that Mishnah is referring to a case where the person redeemed it, but then it got a blemish. See, when something gets a blemish, then it cannot be used as a sacrifice at all. Only then, when it's both redeemed and receives a blemish, then it's completely chulin, and then you can use the milk and everything. But as long as it's unblemished, it retains some kedusha and cannot be used as chulin. Okay, the Rabbi Yosef b'shem Rav Chisda matnita meraken, and Rav Chisda furthermore says, I have a proof from a Mishnah. You only quoted a little piece of the Mishnah, but if you look at the whole thing, then you'll see it proves what I said. Right? Actually, you're not allowed to take from the children or from the milk after you redeemed it. The Mishnah continues and says, but after it develops a blemish, then you can. Right? So only when it develops a blemish, then you can. So therefore, a regular animal that was given for bedek habayit, if it's unblemished, does not completely lose its kedusha. Rabbi Chizkiah b'shem Rabbi Yosef. Now, Rabbi Yosef agrees with the first opinion we had before, which was like Rabbi Yochanan. Yep. And he says, one second. Okay. And he says also that once you redeem it, it becomes chulin, even if it's unblemished. In temar lo yatsu lechulin. And actually, this opinion makes sense, because if you don't say an animal donated for bedek habayit that's unblemished, if you don't say that it becomes chulin, then how can you then re-sacralize it, reconsecrate it as a sacrifice? Because if it's bedek habayit, then you can't make it into a korban directly. So it makes more sense to point to the opinion that it becomes desacralized altogether, chulin, and then you can make it a korban and unblemished. So then that's good. You can actually sacrifice it. Okay, so this seems to be really convincing, to the point that we go back to Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda is the one that said, no, it does not become chulin. So, well, how would you ever transfer it? So he actually, according to this, doesn't say this explicitly, but according to the commentaries on this statement, even Rav Chisda agrees that midoraita, an animal donated for bedek habayit that's not blemished is fine, is chulin, and you can go back. However, he just adds that midrabanan, so that even when it gets a mum, still there's some kedusha to it. What does that apply to? To shearing it and to labor. So since it once was sanctified, so we don't want to treat it like just a regular animal. So midrabanan, we say don't shear it and take its shearings and don't work it. But otherwise, you're right, midoraita, it is actually chulin. Okay, next case. Ifrish nekeba le'olato ulufischo v'lashamo ashamo ose temura. Right, so now we're dealing with a new case. We're going to connect it back to our Mishnah. But the question is, what happens to female animals in general? Someone who designates, sets aside a female animal as an olah. Now, it doesn't work because nekeva cannot be an olah. What will happen to it? Does it become sacred or not? How about for a Pesach? When Pesach has to be male, he takes the nekeva and says, this is going to be a Pesach. Does it work or not? Or how about for Asham? Asham also has to be male. So if he takes a female, does it work? So we're going to see three opinions. The first opinion says, Oseh Timura. Yes, it does become sacred to the extent that if he tries to substitute it with another, then all the laws of Timura will apply. Because this is Kadosh, the old one is Kadosh, the new one is also Kadosh. In other words, it is treated actually like a sacrifice, even though that Nikeva cannot actually be an Olah or Pesach or Hasham. Nevertheless, it does retain the Kedusha of a sacrifice. That's the first opinion. Second opinion, only if he designates a nekeva, a female, as an olah, yes, then that receives the kedusha. But Pesach and Hasham, no. The Gemara will explain what the difference between them. Third opinion, a little confusing, is also to be Shimon. But it's to be Shimon ben Yehuda, Omer Mishum to be Shimon. So we'll call this Shimon ben Yehuda. Even though he's actually explaining Shimon. So there's two opinions about what Rabbi Shimon said. Anyway, he says, for all three, they do not become sacred. This is a female animal, and none of these three things can apply to a female animal. So they do not make a substitute. If I try to make a substitute, it'll work. It's fine. I mean, I don't even need to because there is no kedusha in this animal at all. All right, those are the three opinions. Let's see the explanation. The reason for Rabbi Shimon, the reason why he says, if I designate a nekeva as an olah, that it works, is because that if regarding animals, you're right, I cannot make a nekeva into an olah. But regarding birds, if I donate a bird, then that can be an olah. So therefore, the category of nekeva does apply to an olah for birds, so therefore it does apply somewhat to olah. So even though it's an animal, I can't bring the actual animal, nevertheless the category applies, and that animal will be sacred. Not so for Pesach and Hasham. That's the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, the middle opinion. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, and now he's also going to explain the third one that says none of them become sacred. As if I have a case where it's the same gender and yet it does not become sacred. So all the more so if it's different genders. What is he talking about? What is the case of something that is the same gender and yet because there's some small difference, it does not become sacred? Some animals have to be 1 year old, some 2 years old. If he brings an animal that's supposed to be 1 year old, but it's past his first birthday, or if it's supposed to be 2 years old and he brings it past the second birthday, and it's already 3 years old, right? Specifically in the last case we're focusing on, and it does not become sacred at all, even though it was just his birthday, you just missed it by a couple of days. Right? No good. It's not in the category. It has to be 2 years old. You bought a 3-year-old animal, and so he's making kal vachomer. If in such a case, with animals are so similar, they're just 2 days ago would have been fine. And yet it does not become sacred, all the more so if I brought the wrong gender, that's completely different. And so therefore, he thinks in that all three cases, it does not become sacred. Good. Now we're going to join together this topic that we just mentioned back with the Mishnah of the Yoshua. And the Yoshua who said that when you donate animals without specification, then the animals actually do become sacred. Even the nekevot, right, are treated like an olah, and we have to sell them to someone that needs a shalamim and take the money and buy an olah. So you see, Rabbi Shimon, right, who says that olah does become sacred, and it's a nekeva, and Rabbi Yoshua and the Mishnah, they both agree on the same thing. Can the Rabbi Shimon amar nekeva le'olah lo kitsha ele hekdesh damim in temar kedushat haguf yira'u, and they both agree that the female animal does have kedusha, but what kind of kedusha? Only monetary value. You're not going to sacrifice that actual animal because it's female and it's designated as an olah. So you can't donate the actual animal, but rather we sell it for the money. But the money does have kedusha of olah, and we buy an olah. And so too, Rabbi Shimon says that it's not the actual animal itself, but rather the monetary value the monetary value has to be used for an olah. Because if it was kedushat haguf, which is a higher level, if the animal itself was an olah and in its had bodily consecration, and then we can't bring it, then you wouldn't be able to sell it. You would have to let it graze until it gets a blemish, and only then you would sell it. You see, in both of these cases, both of these opinions, you do not have to let it graze. You can sell it without a blemish, and the person who's buying it will use it as a sacrifice. So therefore, in the first place, it only had kedushat tamim. Amar B. And ani ro'eh et divrei Rabbi Shimon bePesach shamotar Pesach ba shelamim. Says, I do not agree with Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says regarding Pesach, if I donated a nekeva for Korban Pesach, it does not become sacred. Well, why not? I don't think that makes sense. The Biuda Nasi says, because after all, let's say I donate this animal and I don't bring it on Pesach. If I bring it all year round, right, the rest of the year, then it automatically becomes a shelamim, and a shelamim can be a nekeva. So therefore, the sacred status should apply to Korban Pesach, even if in the nekeva, because it can become shelamim. Okay. Now, according to this logic, we ask about Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Velema en ani ro'eh divrei Rabbi Shimon be'asham, shamotar asham ba'olah. How come Rabbi doesn't say the same thing regarding the third category above, that of an asham, right? Where Rabbi Shimon also said that if I make an asham, a nekeva animal into an asham, it does not become sacred. How come you don't say you disagree also with him? Because in there you have the same law. An asham, the person already achieved atonement in a different way or died or something. So then we bring that animal as an olah. And so you see, since it can be used for something else, so it should still be sacred. How come we didn't object to both of these cases, only the Pesach? That was totally different. When I make a nekeva into a Pesach, I donate an animal as nekeva as a Pesach. Well, if I didn't bring it on Pesach and bring it as shalamim, you can bring that actual animal because the nekeva can be brought as a shalamim. But not so in Asham. I bring the Asham as an olah, imikdish Asham ba olah, and gufo karev olah. But olah cannot be nekeva. I still would have to sell it and buy a male to bring as an olah. So it has to go through an extra step. So therefore, you see, it's not the same. Makedun. So what's the essence of this disagreement between the Biuda Nasi and the Shimon regarding the Pesach? Ahen amar hekdesh damim hikdish, and amar hekdesh gufo hikdish. Rabbi Shimon says, well, we will assume that he thinks that it's only hekdesh damim, it's only the monetary value, because he knows that the nekeva cannot be brought as a korban Pesach, and so therefore that it does apply to it because it's korban Pesach. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda assumes that he wants the animal to have inherent sanctity and therefore be left over, and that's why he disagrees regarding the Asham. Rather, that's why Rabbi Yehuda Nasi and Rabbi Shimon agree regarding Asham, that both of them would say that it does not become sacred since that animal itself will never be offered as a sacrifice. Even when it becomes an olah, it's going to have to be switched out. Okay, Rabbi Zera b'shem Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Ta'amad Rabbi Yehoshua. Okay, now what is the reasoning for Rabbi Yehoshua that if you consecrate an animal without specifying why, that it is actually donated as an olah? Because it says, the pasuk says, "Daber el Aaron el banav el kol bnei Yisrael amatar lehem ish mibet Yisrael asher yaklib laHashem leolah hakol karev leolah." So actually, two pasukim back to back. You see, the first one says, anyone from Bet Yisrael or from the Ged Israel, from Israel that brings a korban for any reason, lechol nidechem lechol badechem asher yikibru l'Adonai leolah. So it sounds like, anything you can bring anything. Lefanechem tamim zachar. Next pasuk 19 says, in order for it to be acceptable, it has to be tamim zachar babakar bakesabim uba'izim. So the first pasuk seems to be very inclusive, and the second pasuk says, hold on, it has to be tamim zachar babakar. Okay, so that's what we're going to look at. So from the first pasuk, it sounds like hakol karev leolah. Anything can be offered, and it says l'sonechem tamim zachar. So since it says now only a male, I might think, I'll say only a male. But then the end of the second pasuk says babakar, which sounds like cattle. It says general cattle, which includes females also. And so therefore, since it went back and forth, we assume that he had in mind that they would become olah, whether it's zachar or nekeva. Both of them would become in olah. Rabbi Yitzchak ben Rabbi Elazar Sha'al Ketib Zachar Ba'atamat Babakal Larabotat Nekeva. So Rabbi Yitzchak says, I don't understand what your derivation is. The pasuk says specifically Zachar, and just because it says Bakar after that, so it means Zachar, and then saying it has to be Zachar, whatever kind of animal it is, whether it's Bakar or Kesabim and so on. And so you say the opposite, right? That now if says Bakar, that comes to include Nekevot. Wait, if I follow your logic, also this has to be unblemished. Are you going to say the word bakar since it says like any cattle, any cows? That includes even if they're blemished, right? What's the difference between them? But Rav says there's a huge difference between them. The difference between them, he brings an analogy when you have a loom. You have the two sets of strings that go up and down, and you have the shuttle that you put, that's what he's holding here, that has the threads that go the other way, you put between them. So there's a big gap between the upper set of threads and the lower set of threads, such that you can stick the weaver's rod or the shuttle between them. So he says between these two cases, these two analogies, there's a huge difference. So when the pasuk says that you can bring any animal, then it says tamim zachar. So we say, okay, that's only unblemished zachar. When it says bakar, maybe you could think, but bakar is now including and also female, because in general, female animals can be brought as sacrifices. So it's within the realm of possibility that maybe bakar is including females. It's not, but it's possibly. Whereas tamim, blemished, every animal in the whole world at sacrifice has to be blemished. There's no such thing as a sacrifice that's not blemished. And so therefore, no one would ever think that. So there's a huge difference between saying maybe it can include females and maybe it includes something blemished. It can never include anything that's blemished. This explains why, according to the Yoshua, when someone donates all of his possessions, including male and female animals, the female animals also end up being in olah. Even though you don't sacrifice the actual female animal as an olah, you do have to sell it and then buy in olah. But nevertheless, the designation of kiddushav and olah does apply to the female because it's hinted to, at least in the pasuk. We'll now conclude with the third case of the Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer Omer Yimacheru, and so on. This is when if someone donates all of his possessions, and included with them is wine and oil and birds. And Rabbi Eliezer says, in this case, we do assume that the bird has sacred value as a korban. We'll see what we're talking about sacred as kiddushat damim, and therefore it is sold to someone who needs such a bird, and the animal and the money is used to buy in olah. So here Rabbi Eliezer agrees with what Rabbi Yoshua said above regarding animals. Okay, Rabbi Abahu b'shem Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Talmad Rabbi Eliezer. What's the source for Rabbi Eliezer? Well, it's going to be similar to the same pasuk that we just brought from Vayikra. This pasuk is talking about something that someone who donates without specification, so all his possessions or whatever it is, everything should be in olah. If it doesn't specify, it'll become an olah. If it's something that can be used in such a way. There's sonechem tamim zachar, but the next pasuk says no, only tamim zachar. So yachol afilu ofot. So this middle section, these words say just male unblemished. That sounds like maybe anything, maybe even birds. Therefore, the word bakar says no, not birds. Birds cannot be used. However, since birds are at least hinted to in this section, so they do acquire kiddusha, some level of kiddusha. And so the birds cannot just be sold as bedek habayit. They do have to be sold, and olot are bought with them. So they are within the category, even though these birds specifically you cannot bring. Okay, a clarification about birds. A female bird can be brought in as an olah. If I just take a bird and say I want this female bird to be an olah, that's okay. But if I'm talking about unspecified consecration, I say all this stuff, including these female birds, I'm just donating them without specifying what they're for, then I cannot actually sacrifice that bird. That's why I have to sell it and buy an olah animal as when we talk about unspecified consecration, that only works for an animal. That's what these Pesukim are talking about. Okay, so question on this derivation. Taman amar Rabbi Yochanan tamad Rabbi Shimon. Question. Right, Rabbi Yochanan before was explaining Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon's opinion was that if someone gives a nekeva and designates it as an olah, that it does become sacred. And the reason Rabbi Yochanan explained to Rabbi Shimon was because, after all, a bird can be a nekeva and an olah. And so since nekeva category applies to olah in some cases, so it does apply to this animal, and therefore the female animal does have sanctification as an olah, has to be sold, and you have to buy a male with it. That's what Rabbi Yochanan said before. And so he was comparing it because it's similar to a bird. And now you say, in this case, where he actually donated a bird, that he can't, that's a nekeva, that he has to sell it and he can't just give the bird, right? That was the whole analogy in the first place. So why can't he actually donate the bird? And the answer is, Amar Rabbi Yosef, Kayimtiha, Amar Rabbi Shemuel B'Shem Rabbi Za'ara. Kol she'ena yechola likarev, lo hi v'lo dameha, lo kacha ela hekdesh damim. So anything that cannot be sacrificed itself, or its monetary value cannot be sacrificed, so then it has a lower level of only kedushat damim, and that would be the case of the bird here, because the bird I didn't donate it as an olah by itself, but rather unspecified, so I can't bring it or its monetary value, and therefore it doesn't have sanctification as begufo. But rather only kedushat damim. That's why I can't sacrifice the bird itself and have to sell it. And now we can explain Rabbi Eliezer too. I can't sacrifice the bird itself because the pasuk says unspecified sanctification has to only go to animals, not to birds. I also cannot redeem it, because redemption does not work for the bird. Since the bird, in principle, could be itself sacrificed, I can't redeem it for something else. And therefore, it does not have kedushat haguf. Kedushat haguf would mean either I would sacrifice it itself or redeem it. So since I can't do any of those two with the bird, therefore that kedushat haguf never applied to it in the first place. It was only kedushat damim that applied to it. And that's why we sell it to someone and we take the money and we buy with it an olah animal. Baruch Adonai Olam, amen ve'amen.